deterministic way. Sorry, I should ask before we record, is everyone happy to be recorded? Say in the chat if not. Yeah, it's we also have been running workshops with young people about deepfakes and generative AI, which we'll hear about towards the end of the event. And we also have become kind of experts in how to talk about AI in ways that build good mental models, encourage critical thinking rather than alienate people. And we do advisory on that. One of our biggest projects is the Better Images of AI project, which kind of helps people with visual narratives about AI. So thanks for turning on the recording. We will probably just need to say a couple of words about a couple of words about code of conduct, but just a very quick thing. We have a new report out today. The QR code is there. This is a bit more about the narratives and AI literacy and critical thinking work that we do. But we've also done a research report looking specifically at the impact that generative AI has had on grassroots charities, literally hot off the press today. So I thought I'd give that a quick plug. And this is how you get in contact with us. So yeah, just to say, this is very much meant to be an inclusive space, so please be respectful. We may cover topics that are quite triggering for some people. We'll talk about the many different lenses of AI, but one of those is obviously can be quite harmful to people. And if you do feel it's getting a bit much at any point, please do take a step back. We won't mind if you leave. And if there's anything that you want to let me know about, any behavior that worries you, whatever, please DM me in the group chat. So I think that's pretty much all we have to say to kick off. We can go straight on to our first panel, which is going to be chaired by Dr. Robert Elliott Smith, who I should say is a absolute hero, guru, inspiration of mine for many years, having written one of the first books on really looking at and uncovering algorithmic bias and how it works, what the impact is. That is called Rage Inside the Machine, Rob, right? Rage
That's
Inside
right. You got
the
it.
Machine.
You got
Only
it.
taken me 4 years to get that right. Rage Inside the Machine. How to stop the algorithm making big us of us all. Rob has also been he's an engineer, but also a tech startup advisor, and now runs AI and data science for Digital Catapult, which is an incredibly influential job. So we're delighted to have you here, Rob. I will hand over to you to start the first panel.
Indeed, and our first panel is called Framing Deepfakes: What Influences Public Perception, Policy, and Economic Dynamics. And I'm very excited, as I'm sure you all are, to have really a great panel here, and I'd like to introduce them all. And I see myself as guide here, more than guide and learner, more than anything else, because we have some really great experts here. So our panel consists of Adrija Bose, who is a senior editor at Boom, an Indian independent digital journalism platform with a mission to fight misinformation, explain issues, and make the internet safer. Adrija has investigated how deepfakes impact women in India. And then we have Medina Bakayeva, who is a consultant at Digital Hub on the topics of cybersecurity, digitalization, and communications. As a part of her master's thesis at UCL, Medina conducted academic research on different policy framings surrounding the issues of deepfakes, focusing on UK, US, and EU. She collaborated closely with WeAI and UCL's Community Research Initiative to produce the research. And we also have Dr. Patricia Gestoso, who is a technologist and inclusion strategist at Gestoso Consulting, where she empowers organizations to harness technology for sustainable innovation. Patricia has analyzed deepfake porn case studies from a feminist perspective, including the financial stakeholders. Now, the way I wanted to start this out was just to start it with a fairly general question and try to stand out of the way and let the real experts talk. We're going to have a little time for questions at the end, but if you want to drop questions into the chat, Tanya and I will coordinate trying to get some of those in kind of the last 5 minutes today. So first, let's talk about the status of deepfakes today. How pervasive are they? What are their forms, and what do our panelists see as the most critical area of impact today? And in no particular order, it's the order that Zina's put them on my screen. Why don't we start with Patricia?
Oh, I think that what is interesting in deepfakes is that you know, the most impact, if you see as percentage, it actually comes to women and non-sexual, non-consensual sexual videos, which are, you know, more than 96%. However, what pops into our radar is about politicians. For example, in the UK, it was a lot, you know, and in the US as well. And there is a lot coming as well. I think less maybe public, but there is, you know, scams using, you know, the deep fakes, like the one in Hong Kong about the CFO, the impersonation of a CFO that actually prompted a 25 million transfer of money. Or here in the UK with an audio deep fake. So I think that what I find interesting, and I look forward to the other panelists, is actually the asymmetry of the impact compared with what we read or what we think is more prevalent worldwide.
Interesting. And Adrija, what's your perspective on deepfakes and their prevalence and forms and impacts?
So I just want to talk about the recent Indian elections that we had, and that kind of summarize the real idea of deepfakes, because before that it was just, you know, out there. We knew that it's happening, but Indian elections, we saw a lot of deepfakes. What was interesting is that, and what I think, like, it's across the globe, when it comes to male politicians, we had a lot of deepfakes, but it was all about how you know, their voices were their speeches were changed to say something that they did not say. There was misinformation, a lot of that. But when it came to women politicians, it was videos that were sexually explicit. So, you know, that kind of differentiated the whole, you can see the whole gender dynamic when it comes to deepfakes and its impact. So I think that is what I just wanted to mention.
Yeah, it's very troubling stuff. Medina, what's your perspective?
Yeah, I think, you know, I completely agree, you know, with Patricia and what said and what Adrija said. There is a lot of focus in the media, and also, you know, having done research on policy texts and, you know, what are the kind of key ideas that are being conveyed both in the EU, US, and also the UK. There is a massive focus on the impact of deepfakes on politics, on electoral processes, and more broadly on democracy itself, which I think is very valid. And, you know, this year, I think about half of the world is going into elections. So, you know, it's understandable why there's this frenzy around, you know, the impact that deepfakes can have. And it's interesting to note that the World Economic Forum, they publish a report every year called Global Risks Report. They stated that misinformation and disinformation enabled by AI is actually one of the top risks. Now, I think that's a little bit hyperbolic, and really you see, you know, that there is a massive impact on women. And as Patricia mentioned, you know, you know, women are the prime targets of deepfakes. I think the EU also, in one of their reports, stated that actually the first use case of deepfakes was to create non-consensual pornographic content. So it's really, really worrying. I think there's also an overlap, as Adrija pointed out, that when it does come to the realm of politics, women are, the targets of sexually explicit deepfakes. And I think in 2018, actually, journalist Rana Ayub was subject to, a deepfake, a sexually explicit deepfake, and that resulted in her getting death threats. So you can see how women actually, there's this nexus between political deepfakes and, how they impact women, and women tend to be, impacted much worse. So
Yes.
I think that's
Yes.
worth highlighting. But also in the realm of cyber scams, I work myself in cybersecurity, and we do see a big uptick in malicious activity using deepfakes. And Patricia, you mentioned the case of the company in Hong Kong. There are other cases like this, so this is also something for us to to keep a pulse on.
Yeah, one of the questions that's in my list, but also I'm really quite curious if anyone knows, are the impacts, perceptions, uses different in different places internationally? Is there more awareness in some places than others? What's the international perspective on deep fakes and their impact and how people are aware and dealing with them? And I'll let any of you jump in there. Perhaps Adrija, you might have do you think there's a difference in perspective in India versus in other parts of the world?
Yeah, I think so, Rob. I mean, the understanding of deepfakes is very limited now in countries that are not very used to technology, that are underdeveloped, developing countries, right? So it does have different impact because people are not aware even that that deepfakes are being created. So the policies are different, the laws are different. We don't have any specific laws to deal with deepfakes right now.
Yeah.
I don't know what about other countries, but yeah, the fact that we don't have any laws to deal with deepfakes, that you can't go to a police and say that, hey, this is what the problem is. The police are not equipped to deal with the tech part of it. They can't figure out who has started it, who has created it. They're not equipped to handle those things. So I think for a country that is just like with a lot of mobile phones and internet access, but at the same time not understanding of the impact of it, it plays a huge role in differentiating that.
Interesting. Something that please jump in. Go for it. I don't want to interrupt.
As Adrija said, and I think Medina is an expert in part of policy as well. There is not really a coherent strategy, even in Europe, about how we tackle this. And in the US, for example, each state is different. And China actually was one of the first country that actually made that illegal. But I was checking actually a report on the state of deepfakes from a company that focus in deepfake detection. They were not talking about non-consensual sexual deepfakes, but they were saying that, for example, there is the deepfakes that influence politics, for example, like, for example, wars and so on. They are very strong in Middle East and South Asia, and they target mainly politicians, celebrities, and businesses. Whereas the deepfake scams, they have seen that the higher number is in the US, Latin America, Middle East, and Asia. So everywhere else, apparently, with the exception of Africa and Oceania. And it's typically in trading, retail, and gambling. And then there is, I don't think we talk, is about the deepfake when injections is used, for example, in the Know Your Customers portals, for example, when you enter your biometrics. And
Yes.
that actually is the frauds are coming higher in Latin America, Middle East, South Asia, and China. and it's typically in fintech and payments. So definitively, depending on the kind of deepfakes, it appears to be the impact is very different region by region.
Oh, very interesting. Are there? I know this is to some extent directed at your research, Medina, but are there different lenses through which deepfakes are being considered?
Yeah, absolutely. And it kind of ties into your earlier question. I think there's a broad consensus in the UK, in the EU, and the US in terms of what the issues, what issues deepfakes present. And policy framing, you know, for those of you that are not familiar with the term, it's all about highlighting the key issues and ideas in policy documents. So what I've seen is that, you know, there are three main issues. The first one is, again, talking about elections, threat to democracy, the potential use of deepfakes in disinformation campaigns. The second is the potential for cybercrime. As Patricia, you've highlighted some examples. And then the third is broad risks to individuals and you know, primarily on kind of intimate images, non-consensual deepfakes. So those are the kind of, I guess, issue areas and also, you know, areas of consensus. Now, I think, although there is a broad consensus on what the issues are, the way that they've been translated into policy action differ. And as you said, Patricia, I think in the UK, for example, you've got the Online Safety Act, which bans the distribution of non-consensual deepfake, you know, intimate images. And then you've also got the Criminal Justice Bill, which actually outlaws the creation of deepfakes. But in the US, there's no federal law yet. Although there's been some good progress in California, they've passed a bill where deepfake creation is outlawed, and you can actually even sue, you know, the creators of deepfakes, which is really good to see. I think similarly, Texas has a similar law. So yes, in the EU, the EU AI Act actually does have a clause on deepfakes, but that's more based on transparency and kind of labeling that content. So the outcomes of policy have been different, but I think there's a broad consensus on what the issues are.
That's fascinating. Now I'm going to ask. This is in my list of questions, and it is a weird question in a way. Is we've talked a lot about harms, the nature and interdependence of the harms is very interesting. Are there any upsides to deepfakes? Is there any deepfakery for good? I'm met with stunned silence.
No, I can go first. Very few examples that we have seen in India, but there was one example that I want to point out. So there is this Bollywood actor called Shah Rukh Khan. You may have heard of him, but yeah, he's quite well known. So what they did was basically there were these grocery stores, small local grocery stores, who could use his. I mean, he consented to it. That was the biggest thing. They could use his video and his voice to advertise their company. So it was local grocery stores that were using Shah Rukh Khan's image, Bollywood star's image and voice to, you know, say that, okay, buy from my grocery store. So yeah, that was a great way to, I mean, one of the very interesting ways that we've seen how deepfake can be used for greater good. But I just want to point out that, you know, he consented to it, which is why it made sense. If you just did it because he didn't give consent to it, it would not be the right thing to do. But
How
yeah.
very interesting. I that's a story I haven't heard at all. And I think it's a really quite fascinating story. I wonder if that's being replicated anywhere, because it's a way, if one's image is an asset, it's a way one can expand the utility of that asset for good. And that's very interesting. Yeah, indeed. Any other comments?
I find that one that I have to say it, until I read it, I thought, oh, I should have known it, is that actually deepfakes can be used for practical medical settings, for example, to help patients who have lost, motor, speech, or visual abilities. So, for example, we all remember the voice of Stephen Hawking. So imagine you maybe knowing that you are going to lose your voice, that, you could have there and store it. The other thing is medical research. Some of the algorithms used can be used actually to increase the MRI databases. So to train algorithms. And the third one, which I guess it may be conflicting for some people here, is I read, and I think it was Tanya actually who shared that article with me, is about porn actresses that actually they would like to use, the technology for them, actually, as a way to monetize their work.
Sure. Yes, that's very interesting. And brings up some interesting questions there as well, as that field always does, brings up questions about what is exploitation and what is personal empowerment. That's always an interesting question. Any further comments about the idea of deep fakery for good? Anything from you, Medina? Did you have any examples?
Yes, I think what's interesting is also to focus on the term deep fake, because the term itself already has negative connotations, right?
Indeed.
Is I think the consensus in EU, UK, and US is that deepfakes are AI generated audiovisual content that are specifically created to distort or impersonate individuals or events. So you've already got this kind of pejorative connotation. But when you use the term synthetic media, that kind of broadens the scope, and that's just AI generated content for, any number of use cases. So I think it's interesting to look at the language itself. But yes, I think, AI, so synthetic media can be used for medical research, for personal artistic expression. I think there's also a question, a blurred line between what is satire and what's a malicious deep fake. And I think that's something that's really tricky when it comes to regulating or addressing, this issue from the government perspective, which I find really interesting.
It's very interesting.
Yeah,
and one that.
Sorry,
you go ahead.
One thing
there.
Go
ahead.
ahead.
Sorry. Zoom delay. You go ahead, please.
Yes, I was just going to bring up another example of a British artist called FK Twigs. So she's also using deepfake of herself to engage with her fans, and she's consented to that. So I think more and more you see artists and creators, using synthetic media for expression.
Yeah, I think that's very interesting. One of the things I wanted to throw in just as a comment is slightly in relationship to Patricia's comment on increasing the volume of training data in various applications, which I think is a very positive use. But there is the concern of re-intensifying biases that may exist in the media, in the models that are generating. The models generating will effectively have built into them various characteristics that are from their training data, and when you increase the volume of training data, you're just replicating that bias. But perhaps that's obvious, but it is a slight danger of that use of synthetic media generation. Let me see. I have some more questions for you. Obviously, do you think that there are misconceptions about deep fakes? Are there things that people commonly misunderstand about them?
Yes, I think so. I'd like to jump in, and I think it also ties in with the kind of first point we made about this kind of hysteria around elections. I think there's a lot of media coverage, about how deepfakes can influence the outcomes of elections, but the jury is still out on what exactly those impacts will be. And actually, the Alan Turing Institute published a report on this topic, and they found that, you know, in 112 national elections, there were only 19 examples of AI interference. So perhaps, you know, perhaps this kind of emphasis is a little bit overblown. But you know, the thing that might be a bit more harmful long term is the kind of loss of trust in information sources. So although, you know, maybe right now you don't see a massive impact on elections, over time, as AI becomes more, or deepfakes, synthetic media become more prevalent online, people will question, you know, what they're seeing. They'll question traditional media outlets, what government is communicating to the public. And I think in the long term, that could, you know, negatively impact democratic processes. But I think the you know, the actual impact of deepfakes on electoral outcomes right now might be overblown.
Interesting. I guess there's the question of erosion in trust that you brought up there. I sometimes wonder if we may see a return to trust in institutions simply because trusting content that isn't institutionally associated becomes impossible. So anyway, that's just a comment. I think somebody else is trying to jump in, and I walked all over them. So please, whoever it was, go for it.
Yeah, I think that there are several things as well, you know, that have come to me across. It's like, you know, this idea that this, to me, this misconception that deepfake porns don't hurt the victims because they are not the real person. I've written about deepfakes, and I had people telling me, but Patricia, you are making this up. It's not them. And it's so interesting because there are surveys. I was reading a survey that was done among men that watch porn in the US, and you know, half of them admitted that was deepfake porn, and 74% they said that they didn't feel guilty about it because they didn't have remorse, as you know, the person was not affected. However, the same number felt that they will report to authorities if somebody else would do a deepfake porn from somebody of their family. So I find it very interesting, you know, the moral ambiguity. The other thing is that I think other misconception is that no intellectual property or that personal data theft is involved. Actually, you are picking the face again from somebody. Is their data. And the other thing, even if you are using a porn video, yes, there is the body of an actress. She, you know, that is her body, and somebody produced that video. So it's when we talk about it's free, you know, and it's harmless, that's not. The other thing, again, is that it's seen something free and something between and deepfake porn about this victim and the creator. But we don't talk about the enablers. And the enablers are not only the platforms, because they use Amazon Web Services. They use Azure. The codes are in GitHub for everybody to take. Then the technology, there is more than 2,000 apps that are able to create deepfakes, and Microsoft included. And they are available in the app stores, in the Google, Apple stores. You can pay deepfakes in the platforms using MasterCard and Visa, okay? Even in Etsy, okay? So all this. And the last thing I want to say that I find that is typically, you know, is a misconception, is that tech, you know, that the technology is neutral.
Yes.
No, because we have this big tech that they have decided to release all these apps. And it's like somebody will, if somebody will say, we have seen it, say, oh, I'm going to release an atomic bomb. We won't just say, yeah, because they can. So I think there is this misconception that because you can create it, you know, you are not responsible. So I think we don't make people that create and provide the infrastructure accountable.
Yeah, they're you know, echoing back things that you said, just because I found them interesting. I think there are two things that you brought up. One is about personal responsibility around the things that one makes and the social impact of those things one makes. And the other is about personal rights around the ownership of one's image. And it's interesting that those are two, responsibility and rights are two sides of the same issue there. And I do think one of the, you know, people have been talking about for many years since the advent of the internet, really about people's ownership of their image, their intellectual property, you know, in reforming those laws. And perhaps, you know, deepfakes may be a bit of a driver for ownership of one's own image and possibly, you know, one's own voice and etc. There may be some interesting effects there that occur. It may be prompted by people who work in the photography industry or people who work as celebrities and things like that, because the value of their images is more tied to their financial success than it is for the average person. That's interesting. Tanya, how am I doing on time? I know we started late, so I don't want to drive your schedule badly, but I do want to ask kind of our final question and then maybe take some questions.
Yeah, we have one question in the chat from Brian, which is the UK laws referenced. I think Medina was talking about that. Are they directly on deepfakes or they indirectly touch on deepfakes in regulating about something else? And I had in a bonus question for Adrija. I should find her article and link it in the chat. But anyone else, please feel free to add any questions. I think you have 7 minutes left for questions and last question.
Oh, good. Well, let me put in my last question and then we'll come back to the questions. So I wanted to ask this question because I like a call to action at the end of a talk. So how can individuals take action to address the problems of deepfakes within their own lives, the communities, nations, and the world? What personal actions do any of the panelists feel people can take to try to address the issues around deepfakes? So I'll let any of you jump in first.
Actually, I can talk about this, but I don't think I have a proper solid answer to this. But just extending from the previous question that you asked, and what my co-panelist was talking about, and what I had written about was that, you know, there was in India there were a lot of deepfakes created of Bollywood actresses. But the bodies that were used to create those deepfakes were of content creators who do a lot of body positivity stories, and their Instagram influence is mostly about body positivity. So they shared those images on their platform with consent, and their bodies were used and to make these deepfakes. So that is what was not talked about. We talked about the actresses whose images were used, their faces were used, but the people whose bodies were used were in fact named by media organizations where they wanted to remain anonymous. So that was deeply disturbing that, you know, that the names just came out with people whose bodies were used. And when you say that, you know, what can you do in your person's face, I think again, I don't have an answer to that. But whenever I spoke to these women who are out in, they are now scared to put out themselves in public. You know, they think about posting a photo. Many times they post it long after they have been at that place, like influencers, right? They've gone to an event, but they will post it like, you know, a week later, so that their information is not out there. There's this weird thing, but one of the influencers says she doesn't post her feed because there are these entire pornographic sites that use feed photos to, you know.
Wow.
So it's a complicated thing. I think it's just really challenging what you can do to be safe. But I think you, like, media literacy, understanding what is a deep fake or not is important. But personally, I think I will just ask my co-panelists to answer this question.
Indeed. Anybody else want to jump in about actions that people may be able to take?
I think media literacy is very important. I think a lot of the literature around deepfakes, there are quite a few guides available now. University of California has one on kind of how to prepare yourself for, deep fakes, how to think critically. And I think really the messaging around that is the same as, the usual media literacy best practices. It's checking sources. If something seems particularly, polemic, double check, are multiple sources saying the same thing? But I think overall it is really, really tricky to put the onus on the individual, because we are kind of held a bit captive by the big platforms, right? Whatever content that's being pushed to us, whatever has the most likes, spreads. How do we at least slow down the spread of this kind of viral content? The echo chambers that we're surrounded by. So I think it is really, really tricky. Even in the case of cybersecurity, you have individuals being fooled by deepfakes of CFOs or other senior leadership. But the fact that they're able to send such a big transaction in the first place, that's a policy issue within the company. There should be all levels of approval within a company, and I think that's now coming to light, that we should put more safeguards in. But really, we could raise awareness around the impact of deepfakes. I think it really is up to policymakers to safeguard, particularly women. I think from the conversation today, we can see how disproportionate the impact is on women. So I think there should be much more focus on that, and what policymakers can do to protect us, whether it's pushing stronger obligations on the platforms to tackle the issue, and so on. I also think there's a big emphasis on technological solutions, right? Detection of deepfakes and things of that nature, but there should be a more holistic approach, and I think policy plays a big role in that.
My last interjection. You go ahead, go for it, Patricia. I've got one little interjection, but I'll wait.
To say that, in addition to, I think that definitively we need to make our policymakers and law enforcement, organizations responsible rather than lead it to the person. And also make all this infrastructure, tech infrastructure that is profiting as well, being accountable. And when we talk with digital literacy, I'm part of, of we and AI, I'm all for that. But I think that what I would like to enforce is more we need to teach people the ethical use of technology. But because, for example, what happened in Spain, where, you have basically very young people in the school creating deep fakes from, other female students, is not only is the responsibility for me will come to really educate people. It's like giving them a bomb. So it's not only about discovering, it's to understand, that actually, how you teach children and people to, to have to develop critical thinking about deepfakes as, other technology.
Yeah. Final comment I'd like to throw in is I've talked a lot to regulators in my current job, and around media regulation in particular, the attitude is very focused on harms, very much focused on harms. There is very little discourse around focusing regulation on the promotion of good, because the thing you get immediately from Ofcom and similar organizations is we don't want to be Big Brother. But media regulation was something that existed in the past, still exists in many ways in the UK. It hasn't really propagated over to the internet, and the idea that there is a social responsibility within technology providers, platforms, the social media companies is really kind of off the agenda right now. We're so focused on harms, we're very little focused on the promotion of a better social discourse. And that's the last thing I'll throw in. So I think we're down to the end of time a bit here. Tanya, do we have time for more questions? And are there any you've noticed in the chat that you'd like to bring in?
There's just one in the chat. We will move on, but there's one in the chat related to university libraries, publications, university libraries related to deepfakes and ethical AI. Maybe we can answer that one between us in the chat.
Cool.
And Brian's asked for one or two specific examples. Brian, maybe say related to what, but it could well be that our next guest is able to answer some of those. Jaco, I can see you've been answering in the chat. So yeah.
Before we move on,
Yep.
Tanya, I just wanted to thank our panelists for what was really a very enlightening and interesting conversation. So I just want to get that thank you in and then hand back to you to move on to the next speaker.
Thank you. Yeah, absolutely. Reiterating thank you to the panelists, and thank you also to Rob for chairing that. I think we've already explored how many different conversations there are to be had, and I think that was part of the aim of today's session. Is not to be thinking about deepfakes just down one lens, because that limits responses. So a lens that is both interesting, moving on to, in fact, why don't I share screen while I try and work out the spotlight. Moving on to the next segment, a lens that I often get asked about when talking to people about deepfakes is exactly one that's come up in the chat today. What can we do about it from a technology point of view? How good are technology mitigations, and also, well, are there good uses for these? And that led me to seek information, and this is where I came across Jacobo Castellanos. I hope I've pronounced that right. I've completely lost my Mexican card. Jacobo is actually living in Mexico. I think you're Ecuadorian to start off with, but I was born in Mexico, but clearly have completely lost the lingo, so forgive me on that one. So yeah, the next kind of conversation that is really me interviewing and finding out the answers to some of the questions that we've all had has been about the lens of the technology threats and opportunities, but also looking at in more detail at what some of those technology mitigations are and how on earth you keep up with them. So I will stop sharing and say hello. Let me see if I can spotlight you. Bear with me. Maybe you can say hello, actually, Jaco, while I here you go, while I find you and spotlight you. There you go.
Hi everyone, good to be here.
You are you work for Witness, human rights organization, and coordinate technology threats and opportunities, and have worked on AI and synthetic media for 6 years. So before most people knew what synthetic media was, before people were even really thinking about this, but from the perspective of human rights defenders, journalists, frontline witnesses, which I think is a really interesting perspective, to identify, mitigate and avert harms, but also leverage opportunities. So we're all looking forward to hearing more about that. And I think when we were discussing beforehand, we were kind of really thinking about this question about if our eyes and ears can be deceived, how do we trust what we see online? And what does that do to how we think about the truth? And how do we make sure the truth still matters? And I imagine this is a really important question in the human rights field.
Yeah, so I can start by sharing a little bit about Witness first, because I think that introduces or helps answer the question neatly. So Witness, as you mentioned, is a human rights organization. We began about 30 years ago. And we started out of this idea that videos, that images are an incredibly powerful tool for the defense of human rights, and how they could be used in legal processes, for example, how they could be used for journalism and social media to make sure that justice and accountability are achieved. And so in my program in particular, we do work with emerging technologies. And so 60 years ago, we were considering, well, what impact does AI have on this landscape, and how could it undermine the truth? How could it be dismissed or overwhelmed by this idea that now we can create synthetic media or AI generated or edited content? And so we started thinking about how we can fortify the truth. And at the time, we had this framework called Prepare, Don't Panic. And this connects a little bit to what you were saying before in the panel, Medina, that there's even then there was a lot of hyperbolic discourse around these technologies. And so we had this sense, the idea that we needed to prepare, not panic. Even now, as you've mentioned, there's been a lot of panic around what could happen in elections, but I still think that we're at a good point where we can say maybe not prepare, but definitely act now without still panicking. And so, yeah, the truth matters. And for us, the truth in the world that we move in, it means, for example, if somebody takes a video of a police violence, for example, we need to make sure that that video is trusted. That when it goes into journalism or legal processes, that video, people know that it's true and they can trust on it. And you know, for a long time now, you know, there has been a crisis of disinformation. There has been, as you mentioned, Robert, an erosion of trust. And now, you know, we're trying to understand how AI is changing this landscape and how it's eroding it more, or what's changing anyway, you know, so in different ways. So for example, the fact that we can create very realistic content very rapidly in volume, that changes things. And so we've been preparing, thinking about how we can still fortify the truth in the age of AI. Yeah, so I'll start off with that. I don't know if that covers the complete question, but let me know so I can add to that.
Thank you. And I love that phrase, actually fortifying the truth, rather than saying that you're going to be able to at any point always be the source of all truth, but it's a bigger question than spotting any individual transgression or not. So I was really interested when you were talking about how people trust images that they see, and it reminded me of a conversation that I had with someone who was in the room when Amnesty International released the picture of the Colombian protester, which was an AI generated image, and it had been done for a really good reason, which is they wanted to protect the identity of the person, of the protester. So the protest was real, the police brutality was real. They wanted to protect the identity, so they generated an image. And on the We in AI chat, we all had a lot of conversations about the kind of very nuanced ideas about this. And I also happened to speak to doing some work with the UK PR Association, who'd actually been in lots of conversations before they released that. So it wasn't as though they released it and hadn't thought at all about the impact on the truth. That they had thought about it, and that I think they had disclosed it, but the disclosure didn't carry with the image. And so people were saying, you know, how misleading it was and how can we trust Amnesty again? And yeah, I was just really interested to hear your perspective on that, and how people can maybe meet both of those objectives of fortifying the truth at the same time as perhaps using ways to protect people.
Yeah, so I think, you know, for starters, it's important to recognize that this is evolving so rapidly, and we're just having these ethical conversations right now. And so, you know, we're learning, and there's a lot of gray areas, and so there are cases such as this where it may not be altogether clear, but which is why it's important that we have these conversations. On that particular case that you're mentioning, I think our general take on this has been to say that, well, you know, to the extent that there are real images that are already being shared through different outlets, that are already portraying the reality of what's happening on the ground, then those are the images that should be used. Obviously, privacy, anonymity are always an important consideration. But yeah, it's difficult to strike this balance. In this case, we believe that images generated with AI, again, in the context where there are real images that are being shared around, could generate confusion, could generate distrust. You know, once you see an image like that, specifically the one that you're mentioning of AI-generated police violence in Colombia protests, then it's easier for someone else to come and say, hey, when they see a real image, to say, hey, that's probably not true, you know? And so how do we know what we can trust and we can't trust when we're Now we have in the same landscape images that are real and images that are not. But beyond this specific case, yeah, balancing privacy and fortifying the truth is always a difficult equation. I think there are ways to go about it. And we'll talk about specific tools and technologies that are out there. But one way that we can fortify the truth, so to speak, without infringing on privacy is to focus on the how of an image or a video was created and less on the who, right? So we can focus on, even dates, for example, could be tricky, but if it was edited, for example, or if it was generated with an AI tool, for example, that specific information does not infringe on privacy, but it already gives us a big indicator of its authenticity.
Thank you. And I think that's what, one of the questions we all were keen to hear about what mechanisms you can still trust, what can we trust, and also what are some of the solutions to actually identifying deepfake synthetic images?
So, yep. So we've created sort of a I'm forgetting the word here, but like different buckets or categories of possible solutions, right? Media literacy is still important. I think for most cases, even as these technologies get better and better, I still think that general media literacy is important. Like look at the source, investigate it a little bit is enough to cover a substantial percentage of the disinformation content that is out there. But also recognizing, and this is very key, that our ears and our eyes will deceive us. So it could be part of a solution for a substantial amount of content, but it won't be the silver bullet. Another category of solutions is what we call transparency and disclosure. That is what indicators we can add to the content that we are seeing so that users, algorithms even, can get a better sense of what's happening with the content that we're seeing. And we can talk more about this in detail. I'll just mention, for example, adding verifiable metadata provenance could be an important tool. Fingerprinting has possible solutions to this issue, and watermarking, visible and invisible watermarking. And then the last bucket of potential solutions, I think, is detection. And I mentioned this on the chat a little bit. Detection, especially web-based, publicly accessible tools, are not very reliable. And I encourage folks that are here to look at the article that I shared in the chat about how limited these tools are. But there are other technologies and detection tools a little bit less accessible for important reasons, and we can get to that, that may offer potential solutions for a more reliable detection. And these technologies are getting better. Detection tools are getting better as AI tools are also getting better. So it's a little bit of a cat and mouse game. But we think that, thinking of all of these categories of solutions, we have a toolbox approach that can help us get a better sense of what we're seeing online. Yeah.
Thank you. That's a nice summary of some of the tools available. I think one of the challenges I have in thinking about them is not knowing how long they're going to still work. So you feel there's always this race between people developing technology to identify synthetic media, generative AI, deepfakes, etc., and then people finding ways to get around those who, obviously bad actors. It's fine for, I know YouTube are doing things, there are all sorts of the big players now kind of wanting to put watermarks in, etc. But this sense that there are always going to be people that can find a way around that if they really want to. So yeah, I wondered how you keep up with technological advances, as I mean, your job's at the cutting edge of that, and also what your views are on, is this always going to be this race, or will there come a time where things get a bit more established and it becomes less of the Wild West?
Yeah, so I think that's a really difficult question. I love to see folks here can have any suggestions as to how to approach this. But yeah, so first of all, we can look at the technological tools that are out there. Every one of the tools that I've mentioned has very clear limitations, right? Watermarking, there's been a lot of studies out there that show invisible and visible watermarking that it's so easy to overcome this. For anybody that has a little bit of technical savvy, they can go overcome these. Just to mention one very obvious example for visible watermarking, we have, for example, the images of Dali that they had the little watermark at the bottom right. You could just crop the image and voila, now that is gone. And obviously there's more difficult ways, as you talk about invisible watermarking, for example, or provenance, but we can still overcome these technological tools. So again, none of these are a silver bullet. These solutions need to improve, but they're part of the solution. And so I think that to answer your question, we need to look beyond the tools and the technology itself. And we need to start talking a little bit, again, what Medina, you were talking about policy and how legislators create different mechanisms that can help fight disinformation, that can help fortify the truth. And one of the ways by which we can start doing this and think of more long-term solutions is by what we call pipeline responsibility. And this goes to what you were saying, Patricia, about enablers, right? So if we put the responsibility on the creators of content, or even worse, on the users, we're definitely not going to be able to find solutions to this. But if we look at the pipeline of the ecosystem and we make sure that the model developers, for example, as they are designing and developing these models, that they already add, for example, watermarked content, and that and this is possible already, by the way. There's several examples of AI tools that watermark their content at the point of developing the model, as opposed to creating the output. That makes a huge difference. And so the creators of applications have a tremendous responsibility as well to put guardrails. News media has the responsibility in the way that they talk about these technologies and this content in particular. Social media platforms, of course, and even content creators as well. It's important that they're part of that equation. But yeah, so I think that in order to find more long-term solutions, we need to understand the pipeline and who has what responsibility across this pipeline. I could share an example, if it makes sense right now. One that I work in more closely is verifiable provenance and metadata. So as many of you may know, the metadata that we have today is easily changed, easily edited. So it doesn't give us a huge sense of its reliability or the authenticity of content. So there are various mechanisms thinking about provenance metadata that can be verified. Obviously, these cases require a lot of thinking on privacy and accessibility. But for these mechanisms to work, if we put the entire responsibility on the content creator to add this metadata, the solution just simply won't work at all. So how do we make sure that at the point of developing the model, at the point of creating the tools, at the point of creating the outputs of these tools, that we make sure that provenance and verifiable metadata is embedded into these processes is crucial. And for that, obviously, we need to think about legislation as well, and not just in the good intentions of social media platforms or developers, etc.
Yeah, that's really, I think pipeline is that's the takeaway from me. And that's really speaks to what was going to be my next question as well, about if you think enough is being done. And you've kind of said probably not, but there are people throughout the pipeline that need to be involved in that and are starting to work on it. And also that we're always advocating for greater education and awareness of the public. Any thoughts that you had on that, and any preconceptions and narratives about deepfakes that you've come across that actually hinder people's ability to engage and make good decisions, either about how they regulate, mitigate, or just interact with deepfakes?
I'll start with the second part of that question. So, and I'll mention that part of the way that we work is by organizing consultations in different parts of the globe with different stakeholders, human rights defenders, journalists, filmmakers, technologists. And one of the big challenges is having conversations about technology that is very nascent, and talking about that technology that not a lot of people, maybe they've heard more and more about over the past 2 years. We've been doing these consultations for 4 years. but not necessarily have experimented with. And definitely the terminology is so difficult, because it's evolving again so rapidly. And we've been talking about the same issues with different words in so many different spaces. So for example, I have mentioned watermarking in several instances here. I'm not even sure if all of us here understand the same thing by what we mean with watermarking. And so part of the complications, there's a semantics issue to it, of course, but then the other aspect is, what do we understand by the concepts that we are using? And so I'll mention one specific effort that we're part of, led by an organization that's called Partnership on AI, that included a number of companies and organizations. Let's start with a glossary, right? What do we mean by these signals? What do we mean by these concepts? What do we mean by synthetic media? What do we mean by disclosure, etc.? And that is a starting point to have technical conversations. That doesn't mean that it's necessarily going to help in the public imaginary or in conversations beyond these technical spaces where these conversations are needed to be had. But it's a starting point. And then the other element to consider there is that this is, we're having a lot of conversations about what these terms mean in English, right? Like, as these technologies are developed, it's so important that we have a global understanding and mindset to talk about this. There's so many examples of efforts trying to resolve issues within the US or in the global north, but we're not necessarily looking at it from a global perspective. And yet we don't have the words in English, or we're just developing the words in English and Spanish, French. Well, actually, maybe these are the lucky languages, but in many other languages, we don't even have terms to talk about this. So we recently had a consultation in Brazil, for example, and we were just talking about what we mean by each of these concepts. And so it's a process. The technology is developing it's developing much faster than we could even have conversations, let alone legislation. And so it's a challenge. I don't know the solution to this, but just recognizing that this challenge is out there is perhaps the first step.
Paco, thank you so much. That point about the glossary, we love talking about anti-glossaries at We in AI, because words mean different things to different people, and kind of global mindset added to that is really, really useful. So thank you ever so much. I've definitely learned a lot through that, and I'm sure we'll continue talking. It leads very well into the next topic, and India is going to present next. We'll come back. We'll have a very short break now, maybe 3 minutes, for anyone to go and make a very quick cup of tea if you're in the UK, or just a comfort break. And then we'll come back and talk about the very word deepfakes, I think, within itself, and how useful that is. So if everyone could pop back in 3 minutes, that would be fantastic. Thank you. Thank you very much, Paco. Right, hi everyone. I hope I was not sharing the wrong screen there. I was hopefully sharing a slide which was introducing India, but I'm going to hand over now to Patricia to give more information.
Okay, so hello again. It's my pleasure to introduce our next speaker, India Avalon, who will talk about the problematic origins and usage of the term deepfake. And also she's going to provide some alternatives, which is great. India is a master's student in English at the University of Nottingham, and she became interested in the terminology about deepfakes as part of her research when she noticed a correlating disregard between the terminology we use to refer to types of tech-facilitated gender violence and wider attitudes toward this issue. So, India, the stage is yours.
Good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Apologies, I have lost my voice ever so slightly. I was at the Silverstone Grand Prix yesterday and lots of fun was had. I'm just going to share my screen with you guys so you can hopefully see my presentation. Please do let me know if you can see it.
Yes, it's not full screen though.
Bear with me 1 second. I'm just trying to move my... There we go. Is that better?
Yeah, perfect.
Okay, lovely. Alrighty then. So as Patricia said, I'm very interested in this subject. And I wanted to go ahead and talk about why this term is so problematic and so harmful to survivors of this type of abuse. This term originated online in the Reddit forum that has thankfully, long since been shut down. But it was actually the username of the Reddit user. It was just called Deepfakes. And essentially, this type of abuse originated from this forum where primarily all of the posts on there were simulated pornographic images of women. Obviously, a deepfake can be used in other contexts to make a political figure say something they haven't actually said, for example. But overwhelmingly, this concept we understand of a deepfake is used to undress women or make them appear to be doing sexual acts that they weren't actually doing. And I have a quote here from a wonderful friend of mine, Noelle Martin. We should give credence to this particular term that has been proven to be weaponized primarily against women, and in so doing immortalize the legacy of a Reddit user whose actions have ignited and in turn helped facilitate enormous amounts of harm to women across the world by other perpetrators. So it is from the very beginning so very problematic because it essentially honors this person who created this trend, this type of abuse. And every time we use this word, we are essentially continuing and propagating his legacy. Furthermore, there's different types of ways that images and videos can be manipulated. The term deepfakes, if you are assuming this person thought carefully about how to come up with this term, it's not a hop, skip, and a jump to assume it came from the concept of deep learning, a specific type of machine learning, and it's in reference to that. But there's also sort of less sophisticated forms of editing or altering a video or image that have been dubbed cheap fakes by some wonderful researchers called Paris and Donovan. And they go over this concept in their paper titled Deepfakes versus Cheap Fakes. I will just say now at the top of the presentation, if anyone would like to take a peek at my reading list, that I've put together for this research. I am more than happy to share resources if you would reach out to the organisers of this event at any point. But Paris and Donovan really go into this whole sliding scale of what's a deep fake and what is a cheap fake. But it essentially boils down to deep fakes are produced using deep learning, and cheap fakes can be done through Photoshop or less sophisticated and advanced forms of video or photo editing software. But this creates issues because essentially, this is the sliding scale I was talking about. So over on the far end here, we have some really sort of very advanced examples of a deep fake, so the Obama video. And then over on the other side, there are sort of, like I mentioned, the less sophisticated examples. This sort of creates a lot of loopholes for legal problems. If you are specifically saying something is a deep fake in a court of law and it's proven to not be a deep fake, it's perhaps a cheap fake or produced through less sophisticated methods, there's a space there for the case to fall apart. We need to really carefully delineate the lines when we use such terminology, and the majority of people out there in the world don't really fully understand what a deepfake is or how it's made, and what the difference is between a deepfake and a cheap fake. And that can be quite a dangerous thing. We've seen, I've put up a little screenshot here of a case where this very thing happened, and the entire legal argument fell apart because they couldn't quite decide what this word actually meant. Moving on, it's just not a very nice word. Lots of survivors of this type of abuse feel that the fake aspect of this word invalidates their trauma and undermines what it is that happened to them, because even though it's not really them doing these simulated sexual acts, the hurt and the harm that it has upon them and the damage that it can potentially cause to their life is very, very real. So fake shouldn't really come into the conversation, even though the images are faked, as it were. It's also it doesn't sound very serious. It doesn't sound very what's the word I'm looking for? It doesn't have the same gravitas or weight that the other such terms that we use do. It sounds almost silly, and it disregards the harms that survivors experience and go through. It's also problematic when it's used in conjunction with words such as pornography or porn, because it's not pornography. It can't be, because the person depicted in this image did not consent to that depiction. So it's therefore abuse material. And if people don't see it that way, and if we don't talk about it that way, then nothing will be done about this issue. Oftentimes, the images are a composite of two people, so that the target or the subject will be the face aspect of the image, but the body or the person that their face has been pasted onto is a professional sex worker, and they didn't consent to being part of this image either. So it's having harmful effects on two people, not just one person. And that's a real problem, because it then becomes a copyright issue as well. That is that person's art, that's that person's work, and they deserve to be compensated for their work, but it's being stolen and it's being used to cause harm to other people by these bad actors online. And that is just such a violation of both parties' rights and wishes. These are some recent examples I've pulled from the internet, just a brief scan. They are all taken from headlines or news articles just this year in 2024. They don't really work. They don't really, even though they're quite varied and quite different in their attempts to try to name this issue and describe this issue. They don't really work. AI deepfakes, it's still problematic because it still honors the original creator of this Reddit forum. Deepfake porn, again, it's not porn, it can't be. Neither party have consented. Non-consensual porn, I will explain in a moment how I feel about that particular term. But again, it's a bit of an oxymoron. If it's non-consensual, it's inherently not pornography, because if it's an unconsenting party, it's no longer pornography, it's abuse material. And that's a real shift that needs to happen culturally in how we think about this type of content. Okay, so this issue is sort of shared by the big sister issue, which is the infamous term revenge porn. And there have been lots of attempts over the years to rename revenge porn, and lots of wonderful scholars from around the globe have come forward and thrown their hat into the ring, as it were, with their creations and their terms for this type of abuse. We've got the original attempt by the wonderful Mary Anne Franks in the USA, who came up with non-consensual pornography back in 2013. We've got non-consensual intimate imagery, which is sort of a joint contribution, or potentially came from multiple authors around the same time in 2017, coming out of Brazil and South America. And we've got image-based sexual abuse from the wonderful paper by some very dear friends and colleagues of mine, Claire McGlynn and Erica Rackley, in 2017. And yeah, again, that's another one from my reading list I highly, highly recommend people dig into, because it's fascinating. And a more familiar one to people working in the tech space that you might be aware of is technology-facilitated sexual violence, that is commonly used by Nicola Henry and Anastasia Powell, some scholars out of RMIT in Australia. So I'm not going to spend too much time going through this issue, but as you can imagine, when there are so many different names floating around for the same type of crime, it can get a little confusing, especially for people trying to learn about it. They might not realize that all these different terms mean the same thing, and that they are replacement terms for the problematic revenge porn. Again, I hope everyone attending this talk understands the problems with the term revenge porn. It cannot be porn because the parties did not consent, and revenge, it just doesn't apply in all cases. Most people's understanding of image-based sexual abuse is that it's a disgruntled former lover or partner seeking to get back at an ex-partner who has broken up with them, when obviously that's not always the case, and this crime can take so many different shapes and forms, and I much prefer any other term other than that. Moving on then, these are some better approaches that I found recently in their attempt to describe deepfake abuse, and they are not perfect, but they are trying. Someone has thought carefully with these examples about how to describe this type of crime, and has come at it with a much more careful hand than AI pornography or deepfake pornography or something like that. But unfortunately, every single year, we have more and more articles, even though, bear with me, I need to go backwards. Even though, you know, since 2013, we've had people saying that the term revenge porn is problematic every single year, more and more and more articles come out saying revenge porn and still calling it revenge porn, even all the way up to this year in 2024. There's so many. These are all just from this year, calling it revenge porn. So I've included all of this stuff as an example as to why we need to be consistent in our effort to rename deepfakes and to come together and really cooperate in terms of eradicating its usage, because the sort of mixed efforts from around the world to get rid of the term revenge porn, it hasn't really worked. As you can see, all of these news articles are just from this year, and people aren't really jumping on the bandwagon in terms of stopping using this word. And that's not to say it's the fault of the academics who have tried to rename this problem. It really is an issue in the media. It's impactful. Those words are very powerful. It seems scandalous. It seems naughty, and it gets people's attention, but at the expense of so many victims around the world. It hurts them to see those words, and I am sure that victims of deepfake abuse feel exactly the same way when they see the original creator of this type of abuse honored over and over and over again when the word deepfake is used. But that's not to say there isn't hope. Here are a couple of alternatives that have come forward recently. This wonderful report from Graphica in 2023, they have termed it synthetic non-consensual intimate imagery. Similarly, some scholars from RMIT who also came up with the term technology facilitated gendered violence, they also similarly call it non-consensual synthetic intimate imagery, just swapping the synthetic and the non-consensual around in their usage of the term. And I like this alternative version because it exactly describes what it is, and it also leaves the wiggle room there for this term to be used in a legal context where, whether or not the content was created using deep learning, it covers all bases, and there's no escaping. It could just be a very crudely photoshopped image all the way up to a very, very sophisticated deepfake pornographic film. And I just really, really hope that people understand that this is so part and parcel of why these problems exist in the first place. Every time we say terms like revenge porn and deepfake, we are continuing to hurt people who have already been so very publicly humiliated. And that disregard, that uncaring attitude towards it, it just needs to go. So I really, really hope that together we can come towards a solution where we find a term that we all really like and we cohesively, as a team, land on it and start using it across the board. Because, you know, while I appreciate and respect the hard work of scholars around the world to come up with alternative terms to revenge porn, the fact that there are so very many and they all mean the same thing is definitely very confusing. So I think for this one, we should do better and just adopt one term and use it consistently. But also remember the impacts that words can have. Good words are worth so much and cost so little, by George Herbert. A broken bone can heal, but the wound a word can open can fester forever. So yeah, thank you very much for listening. I hope that yeah, going forward, we can stop using this horrible words and start calling it non-consensual synthetic intimate imagery instead. I'm not sure how I'm doing for time, but if there are any questions, I would love to take some.
I think, Tanya, we are a little bit short on time. Is that correct?
I think we are. The chat, India, is mainly just sharing what, you know, powerful insights that was. So if anyone has a kind of burning question, please do put it in the chat and feel free to discuss there. But yeah, thank you so much, and we will definitely take that call to take action here.
You're welcome. Thank you so much for listening, everybody.
Thank you. And Patricia, I don't know if you had any words to wrap up. I should add at this point that Patricia, I haven't given Patricia the credit for making this event happen. She's inspired me through her work, and also, yeah, done a lot of the heavy lifting organizing this. Patricia, I don't know if you had any kind of final words before we move on to the next.
Only that I want to thank you, India, for bringing the awareness of the language, because I think we don't realize, actually the harms we propagate when we use it, and it's been really thought-provoking, and I'm sure we will think about, we will reflect about it, about your your advice, and actually to realize that as we use the word, we are continuing to perpetuate and give credit to to the person that started it.
Yeah, it's not really intentional, and that's the thing, is we do it so accidentally. But that summarizes the issue as a whole, is people just turn away from these kind of problems. They just scroll past it, and in there lies the problem. We need to be cautious and careful, and look out for one another. Thank you.
So yes, thank you, India, for sharing that. We are moving on now to the final session, which it is kind of interesting because it's it relates to the workshops that we in AI have been working with young people to create, to raise awareness and understanding. So we may have to rethink how we even frame those now. But I'm going to hand over to Velena, who's a long-term volunteer with We in AI, worked on many of our projects. But yeah, Velena, if you could introduce yourself and tell us what we're in for in this final session, hopefully getting everyone here involved.
Hello, everyone. So I'm Velena. I'm a researcher and scholar in AI ethics, and I'll be chairing this final session today. And I recently completed my MPhil in the ethics of AI at the University of Cambridge. And my background is in philosophy, and my research focuses on the moral implications of chatbots, moral autonomy, deepfakes, and value alignment. And here at We in AI, I co-designed the Living with AI course with the Scottish Alliance, and I'm co-leading the Deepfakes and Generative AI workshops for students in England, which is a project all three of us are working on. So the three of us includes Nea Adabella. Nea is a year 12 student studying maths and further maths, physics, and computer science. And as a non-trivial fellow, she also researched testing systems for AI chatbots and wrote a policy proposal with Elo, our third panelist, and winning third place. Since then, Nea has been an active member of We in AI, where she has given input into a workshop for teenagers. And she's also collaborated with the AI Fringe event, where she hosted a workshop titled Responsible AI, a Policy Approach to Bias Eradication. And further, she hopes to study computer science at university. Elo Eselomi is a year 13 student studying maths, further maths, and physics and French. And in March, she was accepted and took part in the non-trivial fellowship, where she researched testing systems for AI chatbots to reduce biases and discriminatory content with Neha, winning third place together. Since then, Elo has been an active member of We and AI as well, where she has helped to develop a workshop for teenagers. They have also collaborated on the AI Fringe, and she hopes to study computer science and philosophy at university. And in her spare time, she likes to play the piano and cello, watch films, and play netball. So this is the background of whom you're going to speak to today. And this session is going to be quite interactive because we'll start with a game to see how well you can spot deepfakes. And then we'll move on to a little Q&A that I'll chair, and finally open up to questions from you all, the audience. So shall we start with the instructions, Elo?
Okay, so hi guys. So we're going to start by doing a little quiz about basically deciphering whether photos that we see are deepfakes or not. So if you go to play.bookit.com, you'll be given some images to choose whether they are real or fake. If you choose correctly, you'll be given a chest to choose from. Your chest could contain a penalty, a bonus, or the chance to swap with someone else's gold. This works best with your phone. So if you scan the QR code on the shared screen, as people are joining, you can start joining. If you are on a phone, however, the images may be quite small if you're trying to look at like the photos in the game. So you may want to click on the image to see it better.
We have 7 people already. Oh, 9. We have someone called Help. That seems like a fun name.
Should we stop, or is anyone else trying to join? Or
Okay, we can start. So now you should look at your own phones to play the game, not on the big screen. You've got only half of the time left, so good luck. I feel like we should have a sports commentator saying how people are taking over each other in the game. We've got help as number one again. Oh, taken over again.
I did actually set some music up to play during this high energy, but Zoom left it so that I couldn't turn it off without it still being in my ears and no one else heard it. So sorry, we have no music, but I think I can do a ticking clock. It's getting very competitive. I have no idea if the people with the big numbers are really good at spotting deepfakes or just really cutthroat. Hey.
Well, congrats to Jacopo, I think, and to the other two winners. Help didn't need much help after all. But we're wondering now what all your reactions are. I don't know if you thought it was difficult or not, or if you perhaps feel a bit discouraged or might seek tips now to try and recognize deepfakes or synthetic media, because sometimes it might just be the low quality of an image, such as heavy pixelation, and that can be a giveaway. But often deepfakes are more subtle. So tips for recognizing them include looking at hands, which might appear unnatural or sometimes have missing fingers, noticing if the skin looks very shiny and smooth, and checking for inconsistent shadows or pixelation around the edges of a face, as well as inconsistent backgrounds. But despite these tips, what we think is important here is that many deepfakes are highly realistic and increasingly difficult to detect on your own. So as the technology has evolved, professional software is often required, as we've discussed before, to identify those deepfakes. That's why the key message here is that it's crucial to use our critical thinking, double check sources, and question the potential incentives behind a picture, as that's really the kind of tools that we're in control of, right? That's the ones we can properly rely on. So now let's start with the Q&A. The first question I have for you, for my panel, is what is the awareness and understanding of deepfakes and audiovisual disinformation amongst children and young adults? How do they feel about them?
Yes, I'll take this one. I think young people are becoming increasingly aware of what a deepfake is, especially over the past 2 to 3 years. A lot of media and entertainment use deepfakes as a sort of gag. For example, a few years ago, there was a deepfake on Channel 4 of Queen Elizabeth, which generated a lot of controversy. And many platforms like TikTok, there are examples of viral videos which utilize deepfakes. TikTok is obviously used by a very large range of ages, from young children to adults, despite the regulations put on by the company already. Thus, young people as young as like 5, 6, 7 are also being exposed to deepfakes. Some of the things they may be seeing are things like memes of famous political figures like Kim Jong-un, Donald Trump, Barack Obama doing untoward things or covering like famous songs. Also memes of celebrities like Tom Cruise or something like Elon Musk or the Kardashians. So I would say that deepfakes are quite ingrained in like youth public consciousness, but mainly as a sort of joke or a form of entertainment. I don't think people our age, or like around like teenagers, see the negative impacts of deepfakes, which can manifest through like the media and politics. And I don't think people really think about like the negative impact until it could truly affect them or people that they're close to, for example, in scams or in adult material, adult content being generated. Because of the prevalence of deepfakes that mainly target celebrities and the fact that some of the celebrities are openly accepting of deepfakes. For example, I think last year, Kendall Jenner let Meta use her identity on Instagram as like as Billy or something else on Instagram, so for millions of pounds. So it doesn't really seem like a massive potential problem that everyone can be prone to. Of course, there are young people who are more aware of the impact on deepfakes on society, but I think then their knowledge is mainly through their own research or like articles or charities like We and AI attempting to shine a light on this issue. I don't think there's that much education in schools, maybe in like PSHE lessons about deepfakes and audio-visual disinformation. So I would say the majority of teens without the privilege of knowing about this are kind of apathetic towards them or don't really see them as a threat. And I think that's I get quite anxious about it because I feel like young people should be very aware of this, because not only because deepfakes are getting more and more advanced and could be a very prevalent part of our lives in the future, but also it is just improving at an exponential rate. So we need to make sure that young people are in the know.
Excellent, thank you very much. I think it's good to really highlight here that after our sessions with those workshops that we've done in schools in the UK, only 10% of students actually really understood deepfakes and the kinds of ethical implications that they can have. So that really highlights your point, Elo. On to a second question. How would you categorize the different impacts deepfakes might have on young people specifically?
So the three categories I would put deepfakes in are entertainment, deceptive, and nuanced. So most deepfakes that currently impact the youth are in the form of entertainment. One example is the Pope in the puffer jacket deepfake that was created using Midjourney, shared on Reddit just this year, and I'm sure lots of you have seen it, or last year. I know the first time that I saw it, a friend sent it to me, and it definitely amused me for a while because it was really funny. But then after a while, it kind of hit me that it could be any one of us who was deepfaked like that. And that kind of scares me. It gained a lot of traction across all social media platforms and many news sites. And I think the main reaction it got from lots of the youth is, oh, that's so cool. I really want to try this technology. However, I know that a few people from all ages, like me, were also quite apprehensive about it, as it was like a precursor for what was to come, hyper-realistic deepfakes, which were increasingly difficult to spot at first glance. Deceptive audiovisual disinformation has far less of an impact on young people than ones created for entertainment, from what I've seen. An incident took place several months ago now, and it was dubbed as the grandparent scam, when a grandmother was scammed out of $7,000 because she received a phone call from her grandson that said she had gotten into an accident. He had, in fact, not gotten into an accident, and the deepfake had simply imitated his voice. But she only realized this after she saw a similar situation on the news. And this honestly terrified me, because I know that my mom would definitely fall for this. And the fact that this could have happened to her is really scary. As deepfakes improve, they will revolutionize the way scammers can steal money. So even the most tech-savvy young person like me or Elo can be at risk. And the last, and in my opinion, most interesting type of deepfake are nuanced ones. This year, Levi's were in a massive scandal when they collaborated with LaLaLand.ai to create AI-generated models. Their reasoning was to increase and promote racial and body diversity within its models. And although that is a nice sentiment, many were confused as to why Levi's couldn't just hire models from diverse backgrounds instead of taking away the livelihood of people of color or plus-sized models. Honestly, this situation angers me because it hurts to know that they just underplayed the role of hiring diverse models in the space, and this is really taking the livelihood away from some models. I think this situation and many others similar to them will begin to impact the youth or all people who work in the creative industry, because big corporations can very easily replace them or their work with AI-generated figures, images, etc. Additionally, examples like this could have an even larger effect on the way that society treats others, making this a problem within the wider world, not just within the group of those interested in AI. After the workshop that we did in the Tiffin Girls' School, we came to realize that the majority of youth did have a good understanding of AI-generated content, but they didn't consider the implications of them. And this really highlights that regardless of the type of deepfake, young people are currently unprepared to realize the impact of deepfakes on them. This is especially harmful when considering the deceptive deepfakes I mentioned before, as they have the power to disrupt individuals' lives, as I'm sure you've heard about from earlier today.
Thank you. We've had here a comment in the chat about positive use cases, and I think that links it right to the next question. However, we're running short on time, so I'll ask you to respond very briefly. But to what extent do you think that generative AI and the growth in synthetic media presents risks or opportunities for young people?
Yeah, I saw the comment on the chat, so I'm happy that there are lots of benefits, and yeah, so I'll go into them now. So one, particularly for young people, is creative expression. Generative AI tools can empower young people to express their creativity in various ways, like art, music, and storytelling. They can also use these tools to like explore and enhance their artistic talents, particularly in like art and painting. And another benefit is educational tools. AI can be a valuable educational resource in helping with personalized learning, like in Quizlet or Notion. And it can also offer tutorials. I think ChatGPT 4.0 now letting you basically solve maths by yourself. So that kind of can improve the learning of many young people. And finally, innovation. As AI systems are constantly breaking boundaries and improving, we definitely need to include more diverse voices when it comes to race, gender, and age. So young people can definitely have their voices heard when it comes to AI, and it can also become the forefront of innovation since it's such a nascent technology and it's growing so quickly. But yes, although there are lots of opportunities, there are some risks as well for young people. One is job disruption. As AI becomes more sophisticated, it has the potential to automate jobs, and including those that are often held by young people, potentially leading to job displacement. One example I can think of is photography, which used to be quite really a way for people to express themselves, but now can basically just be generated for a lot cheaper on ChatGPT or something. Another example is misinformation and disinformation, where people can basically create highly convincing fake content, as you could see in the quiz beforehand, which can be exploited to spread misinformation. Young people who often rely heavily on social media and digital information to get their news and to get like the up-to-date stories in their lives may be particularly susceptible to such content. And finally, there are quite a few psychological and social impacts of generative AI and deepfakes. The constant exposure to AI-generated content, including unrealistic body standards and manipulated images, can contribute to negative body image issues and mental health problems among young people. Even now, without AI, with filters, people feel the need to have plastic surgery and to have other procedures to have the perfect look to fit the trend, the current trend. So with AI generated images, I fear that this will kind of be exacerbated as the pressure to conform to a standard increases.
Thank you. That was great. Let's finish with a small comment on the advice we gave to other young people in those workshops.
Yeah, definitely. So I think we should have a few main goals here. And I think the first of which should be education and awareness. It's really important to educate and raise awareness because many young people were not aware of the implications of AI and its impact on society. And in general, also public awareness would be important to take care of. And it's great to see charities like We and AI working towards this. And most importantly, we should encourage critical thinking from everybody because, as Valina said earlier on, we never know how these deepfake technologies are going to improve in the future. So being able to exercise your critical thinking is extremely important now more than ever. A second main goal should be increasing the youth's involvement with tech. Although it is very high, I think it's important that we encourage youth to, first of all, think critically with how they engage with technology, and also encourage the youth to create technology and not just be passive consumers. And in that journey, support their innovation as well. We should also encourage young people to involve themselves in policies and shaping them, and also advocate for ethical AI. And I think the third and final goal would be insisting on technology to engage with the youth. So listen actively to the concerns, ideas, and opinions of diverse people because they will have ideas that you might not necessarily have. And you can do this by creating platforms and opportunities for them to express themselves without disruption or fear of being judged. Ensure that there's a long-term engagement and also make sure there's a sort of feedback loop going on. So every time they give you feedback, make sure it's being implemented.
Excellent. Thank you, Neha. I think that concludes our part. I think we're out of time, Tanya, but otherwise pop any questions into the group chat and we'll try to answer you. Thank you.
Thank you. And yeah, what an amazing what amazing CVs you all have, worthy of people 3 times your age, and it's been so amazing to get your perspective and input into understanding how to communicate these issues. So I'm gonna wrap up now. I've I think already eaten into too much time through going off on flights of fancy, so I will just leave you with the contact that I put in the chat, and thank you all very, very much for turning up. It's the first time we've ever done an event like this. Thank you again to Patricia for organising, and we'll let you know what we do about the recording, but I really hope that you can stay in touch, and we'll all be thinking, I think, about the very term deepfake itself for the future. So yeah, please leave. I'll keep the room open for a little bit, so you can put in any contacts or just comments, but I'll wrap it up there. Thank you all very much.